The zip ties cut into Helena Scott's wrists as rough hands dragged her across the deck of the cargo ship. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, dark water meeting darker sky under a moonless night. She could hear the men laughing, their voices rough with vodka and cruelty. "Amerikanskaya shpionka," one of them spat. "American spy. You think you are so clever. But now you swim with the fishes, da." Helena's mind raced through her training, through every scenario she'd prepared for in 15 years of intelligence work. Capture, interrogation, torture, execution. But being thrown overboard 60 miles from land in the middle of the Pacific, that hadn't been in the manual. "Wait," she said in perfect Russian, keeping her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "I have information, valuable information. Your employers will be very unhappy if you kill me before—" The rifle butt caught her in the stomach, driving the air from her lungs. She doubled over, gasping, tasting blood where she'd bitten her tongue. "No more talking," another voice growled. This one was older, with the flat accent of someone from Vladivostok, probably ex-military. Definitely dangerous. "You had your chance to talk on the boat. Now, we make you disappear." They lifted her. She was 5 feet 6 inches and 130 pounds, easy for 3 armed men to handle, and carried her toward the rail. The ocean below was black as oil, churning with swells that spoke of a storm somewhere to the west. Helena's training screamed at her, "Don't panic. Assess, adapt, survive." But how do you survive being thrown into the Pacific Ocean with your hands zip-tied 60 miles from land, surrounded by men with automatic weapons who'd shoot you if you somehow managed to grab onto the ship? "Any last words, American?" the leader asked, his breath reeking of cheap cigarettes and cheaper vodka. Helena looked him in the eye, her mind making rapid calculations. Distance to water? 12 feet. Water temperature, probably 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Survival time, maybe 2 hours before hypothermia. Chance of rescue, functionally 0, unless— "Yeah," she said, forcing a smile despite the terror. "I have last words. Tell your boss that the SEALs are coming, and they swim a lot better than you assholes." The man laughed, a harsh bark that held no humor. "SEALs? There are no SEALs out here, little spy. Just ocean, just death." They threw her. For one endless second, Helena was airborne, the cold Pacific wind whipping past her face. Then she hit the water, and the cold was so intense it felt like being stabbed with 1,000 knives simultaneously. The shock drove what little air she had left from her lungs. She sank, the darkness swallowing her, the weight of her clothes and boots dragging her down. Above, she could hear muffled laughter. Then, the ship's engines changed pitch, accelerating, leaving her behind to die alone in the dark. But Helena Scott hadn't survived 15 years in naval intelligence by giving up easily. And those men had made one critical mistake. They'd assumed she was alone out here. She wasn't. Somewhere in this dark ocean, 8 Navy SEALs were swimming. They'd been shadowing the cargo ship for 3 hours, waiting for the right moment to board, to extract her, to complete a mission that had gone catastrophically wrong. Now they had to find her. In 60 square miles of open ocean, in the dark, before hypothermia or drowning claimed her. Before we reveal how they did the impossible and what Helena had discovered that was worth killing for, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from and hit subscribe. Because what happened in the next 6 hours would push human endurance to its absolute limits and prove that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is underestimate a woman who refuses to die and the SEALs who won't abandon her. 72 hours earlier, Helena Scott had been sitting in a secure briefing room at Naval Base Coronado, looking at satellite photos of a cargo ship that shouldn't exist. At 36, she'd spent her entire adult life in intelligence work, first as a Navy analyst, then CIA, now back with naval intelligence in a role that officially didn't exist and unofficially gave her access to information that could start wars. "The ship is registered to a Panamanian shell company," she explained to the 8 SEALs sitting around the table. "But our signals intelligence shows communications consistent with Russian military encryption. And 3 days ago, we intercepted a transmission that suggested they're transporting something extremely valuable from North Korea to a buyer in South America. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, the SEAL team leader, studied the photos with the professional detachment of someone who'd led dozens of high-risk operations. 42 years old, with gray creeping into his beard and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent in the world's worst places, he had the kind of calm authority that made men follow him into situations most people would consider suicide. What kind of something? That's what I need to find out, Helena replied. Intelligence suggests it could be nuclear materials, advanced weapons technology, or possibly biological agents. Whatever it is, we can't let it reach South America. So we board the ship, secure the cargo, and extract, Morrison said. It wasn't a question. This was standard SEAL work, though standard in their world meant things most people would consider insane. Not quite, Helena corrected. I need to board the ship, alone. Pose as a maritime inspector from the International Shipping Commission, get access to their cargo manifests, plant surveillance equipment, and identify exactly what they're carrying. Then you extract me and we call in a Coast Guard interdiction team. The SEALs exchanged glances. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Hayes, Morrison's second in command and a veteran of more operations than he could count, spoke up. Ma'am, with respect, that's a terrible plan. These people are smuggling illegal cargo. They're not going to just let some inspector poke around their ship. They will if I'm convincing enough, Helena said. She'd worked with special operations teams before and knew they'd be skeptical of sending a lone intelligence officer into a hostile situation. I've done this kind of work before. I speak fluent Russian, I've forged credentials that will pass any inspection, and I know how to handle myself in hostile situations. And when they figure out you're not who you claim to be? Another SEAL asked. This was Petty Officer Danny Martinez, younger than the others at 28, but already a veteran of 4 deployments and known for his instinctive tactical sense. Then you come get me. Fast. Morrison leaned back in his chair, thinking. He'd worked with intelligence officers before, some good, some disasters waiting to happen. Helena Scott struck him as someone who understood risk, who'd been tested in the field and survived. That was worth something. How far offshore is this intercept happening? 60 miles, in international waters. The ship will be transiting through a narrow channel between shipping lanes. Minimal other traffic. Perfect for a covert approach. Also perfect for them to kill you and dump your body where no one will ever find it, Hayes pointed out bluntly. That's why I'll have 8 heavily armed Navy SEALs swimming nearby, Helena replied with a slight smile. I'm confident in my ability to stay alive long enough for extraction. Morrison studied her for a long moment. He'd learned to read people over 2 decades in special operations, to distinguish between false bravado and genuine confidence, between people who talk tough and people who'd actually been tested under fire. Helena Scott had something in her eyes that he recognized, the look of someone who'd been in bad situations and fought their way out. You've done maritime infiltration before? 3 times, successfully completed all 3 missions, though I'll admit this is the riskiest one yet. Because if it goes wrong, we're 60 miles from any support, Morrison said. No air cover, no quick reaction force, just 8 SEALs in the water against an unknown number of hostiles on a ship with God knows what kind of weapons and defenses. Correct, Helena agreed. Which is why I need the best, which is why I asked for you and your team specifically. Morrison looked at his men. SEALs didn't get to where they were by avoiding risk. They got there by calculating risk, preparing for every contingency, and executing with a precision that turned impossible missions into completed objectives. But they also got there by knowing when to say no to missions that crossed the line from high risk to suicide. This one was close to that line. We'll do it. But we do it my way. You wear a tracker, you wear a concealed radio, and at the first sign of compromise, you signal us and we come in hot. No heroics, no trying to salvage the mission if it's blown. Agreed, Helena said, though they both knew that in the field, plans changed and no heroics often became do whatever it takes to survive. They spent the next 48 hours in intensive preparation. Helena memorized every detail of her cover story. She was Inspector Marlene Hoffman from the International Maritime Shipping Commission, conducting routine inspections of cargo vessels in international waters to ensure compliance with safety and environmental regulations. She had documents, credentials, even a fake website that would show up in searches as legitimate. She'd carried out similar cover identities before, in ports from Istanbul to Singapore, and she knew the rhythms of the role, slightly officious, professionally bored, bureaucratically thorough. The SEALs prepared their equipment with the meticulous attention to detail that separated elite operators from everyone else. Rebreathers for long-duration underwater swimming that left no telltale bubbles, weapons sealed in waterproof containers, HK-416 rifles with suppressors, Sig Sauer P226 pistols, and enough ammunition to fight their way through a small army if necessary. Communications gear that would work even when submerged, explosives for breaching if a forced entry became necessary. "What's our contingency if you can't extract her peacefully?" Hayes asked during one planning session, studying the ship's schematics that intelligence had provided. "Violent boarding action," Morrison replied without hesitation. "Explosives on the hull, simultaneous entry from 3 points. Take the ship by force and secure the cargo. But that's absolute last resort. The moment we do that, we've announced to the world that the U.S. military is conducting offensive operations in international waters. The diplomatic fallout would be catastrophic." "Better than leaving her to die," Hayes said flatly. "Better than leaving her to die," Morrison agreed. "So we plan for both, quiet extraction and, if necessary, the loudest rescue you've ever seen." Martinez spoke up, voicing a concern that had been bothering him. "What if they've got more firepower than we expect? What if it's not just a crew with small arms, but actual military-grade weapons, heavy machine guns, maybe even anti-personnel grenades?" "Then we adapt," Morrison said. "That's what we do. But our primary mission is Agent Scott's extraction. Everything else, the cargo, the ship, the crew, is secondary. We get her out alive. That's non-negotiable." The insertion went perfectly, which should have been Morrison's first warning that something was going to go wrong. In his experience, missions that started smoothly often ended badly, as if the universe had to balance the equation. A Coast Guard helicopter dropped Helena 12 miles from the target ship just after sunset, with instructions to proceed to the vessel and request permission to board for inspection. She was wearing a business suit under a flotation vest, carrying a waterproof briefcase with her forged documents and a tablet computer that looked professional, but was actually packed with surveillance equipment that would transmit everything she saw back to the SEAL team. The cargo ship, its name was the Pacific Star, though Helena was certain that wasn't its real designation, responded to her radio call with what sounded like genuine surprise, which was good. Surprise meant they weren't expecting inspection, which meant they'd have to scramble to hide whatever they were actually carrying. It gave her an advantage, however slight. "Pacific Star, this is Inspector Hoffman from IMSC. I'm conducting routine safety inspections in this sector. Request permission to board for examination of cargo manifests and safety equipment." There was a long pause. Helena could imagine the conversation happening on the bridge. Should they allow her aboard or refuse and deal with the legal consequences? She'd gambled that they'd choose to let her aboard, figuring they could hide whatever illegal cargo they had and that one inspector wouldn't be a serious threat. Criminal organizations, in her experience, tended to underestimate bureaucratic inspectors. It was one of the reasons the cover worked so well. "Inspector, we are on schedule for delivery. We cannot delay." "This will only take about 2 hours," Helena replied, keeping her voice professionally friendly but firm. "It's required under international maritime law. If you refuse inspection, I'll have to report your vessel to the International Maritime Court, which could result in your shipping license being suspended. That would be much more expensive and time-consuming than a simple inspection." Another pause, longer this time. Helena could imagine the calculation happening. Was the hassle of inspection worth avoiding the legal complications of refusal? Most smugglers, she knew, would choose inspection and rely on their ability to hide the contraband. It was the devil they knew versus the one they didn't. "Very well, Inspector. We will slow to allow you to board, but please be quick. We have delivery schedule to maintain." "Thank you, Captain. I appreciate your cooperation." Helena climbed aboard via a rope ladder, her briefcase slung over her shoulder, putting on the slightly nervous demeanor of a mid-level bureaucrat who spent most of her time behind a desk and wasn't entirely comfortable on the open ocean. It was a careful performance, not so nervous that she seemed suspicious, but nervous enough to seem genuine. 3 crew members met her on deck, rough-looking men with the kind of faces that suggested they'd done worse things than smuggle cargo. Ex-military, Helena assessed immediately. Possibly Russian special forces, based on their bearing and the way they moved. That was concerning. Smugglers didn't usually employ former special operations personnel unless they were transporting something extremely valuable. "Inspector Hoffman," she said, extending her hand to the oldest of them, a man with a salt and pepper beard and cold blue eyes that studied her with predatory intelligence. "Thank you for allowing me aboard." "Captain Volkov," he replied, shaking her hand with a grip that was just slightly too firm, slightly too aggressive. Testing her. Seeing if she'd flinch or show weakness, Helena met his grip firmly but not aggressively, maintaining the character of a competent but non-threatening bureaucrat. "You understand we have schedule to keep, yes?" "Of course, Captain. I'll be as quick as possible. If you could show me to your cargo hold and provide your shipping manifests, we can get this inspection completed and you can be on your way." Volkov studied her for a long moment, his eyes calculating. Helena kept her expression neutral, professional, slightly bored. Just another government inspector doing a routine job. Nothing to worry about, nothing that required special attention beyond basic cooperation. "This way," Volkov finally said. He led her below decks with the other 2 crew members following close behind. Too close. Helena's training screamed warnings, but she maintained her cover, keeping her movements relaxed and unhurried. The narrow corridors smelled of diesel fuel and salt water, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that flickered occasionally. Around them, the ship creaked and groaned as it cut through the Pacific swells. The cargo hold was exactly what she'd expected, rows of shipping containers, all marked with legitimate-looking logos and identification numbers, but her trained eye immediately spotted inconsistencies that a real inspector would have noted. Fresh welds on several containers suggesting recent modifications. Temperature control equipment on containers that were supposedly carrying automotive parts. Unusual sound-dampening material on the bulkheads. And most tellingly, armed guards at the far end of the hold. 4 men with AK-47 rifles, not even pretending to be doing anything other than security work. "Armed security?" Helena asked, making a note on her tablet and taking what appeared to be routine documentation photos. Photos that were being transmitted in real time to Morrison and his team swimming somewhere in the dark ocean below. "That's unusual for a civilian cargo vessel." "We carry valuable cargo," Volkov replied. "Pirates are still a problem in some waters. It is necessary precaution." "Of course," Helena said, moving closer to the containers and examining the identification numbers. She was recording everything. The container numbers, the supposed contents, the modifications she could see. If she could just get a look inside one of them, confirm what they were actually carrying, the mission would be complete. "And your shipping manifests? I'll need to cross-reference the contents of each container against your documentation." "Yes, of course. But first, Inspector Hoffman, or should I say, Agent Scott, we need to have a conversation." Helena's blood turned to ice, but years of training kept her expression confused rather than fearful. She'd been made before, had talked her way out of blown covers, knew the dance. The key was to maintain the fiction as long as possible, force them to show their cards. "I'm sorry? I think you've mistaken me for someone else. My name is Marlene Hoffman, and I'm—" The rifle butt caught her in the kidneys, dropping her to her knees. The tablet clattered from her hands as pain exploded through her body, radiating up her spine and stealing her breath. Before she could react, before she could access any of the defensive training that had been drilled into her over years of field work, hands grabbed her arms, wrenched them behind her back with professional efficiency, secured them with zip ties that bit into her wrists. "We know who you are," Volkov said calmly, picking up her tablet and examining it with the air of someone who'd expected exactly this. "American intelligence, naval intelligence specifically, based on the encryption protocols on this device, very sophisticated, very expensive. not what a maritime inspector would carry. Helena forced herself to breathe through the pain, forced her mind to work despite the fear flooding her system. Compromised. The mission was compromised before it even began. They'd been waiting for her. But how? Her hand moved instinctively toward her collar, where a microtransmitter was hidden in the button. One press, and Morrison would know she was blown, would know to abort or assault depending on his tactical assessment. But Volkov was faster, his reflexes betraying years of training that went far beyond civilian security work. He grabbed her hand, twisted it away from her collar with enough force that she gasped and ripped the button from her jacket. "Looking for this? We know all about your toys, Agent Scott. We've been at this game longer than you have. Your organization has a leak, a significant leak. They told us you were coming, told us what to look for, told us exactly how to recognize you despite your excellent cover identity." He dropped the transmitter to the deck and crushed it under his boot with casual finality. "Now, you're going to tell us exactly what you know about our operation. Who else knows you're here? What assets are in the area? Who is your contact in our organization? How much does naval intelligence actually know about our cargo?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Helena said, keeping her voice steady despite the situation, despite the pain in her kidneys and wrists, despite the knowledge that she was alone on a hostile ship 60 miles from land with no way to call for help. "I'm a maritime inspector conducting routine." Volkov slapped her, hard enough that her head snapped to the side and blood filled her mouth from where her teeth cut the inside of her cheek. The taste of copper was immediate and overwhelming. "No more games, Agent Scott. We don't have time for this. We can do this easy or we can do this the hard way. And trust me, you don't want the hard way. I have men on this ship who used to work for Russian military intelligence. They know techniques that will make you beg to tell us everything. Techniques that leave no marks but cause extraordinary pain. We can keep you conscious and coherent for days while we extract every piece of information in your head." Helena spat blood and met his eyes, making a decision. She couldn't break the cover now. It was already broken. But she could buy time. Time for Morrison to realize something was wrong. Time for the SEALs to get into position. Time for a rescue that might or might not come. "Then I guess we're doing it the hard way, because I'm not telling you anything." Volkov's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a kind of cold respect mixed with anticipation. "I was hoping you'd say that. Dmitri, Alexander, take her to the interrogation room. Make sure she's secure. I'll be there in 10 minutes, and then we'll begin properly." The two men hauled Helena to her feet and dragged her through the cargo hold toward a door at the far end. She struggled, not because she thought she could escape. The zip ties and multiple armed guards made that impossible, but because struggling was what a real prisoner would do, and any information she could gather now might be useful later. She noted the positions of the guards, the layout of the hold, the types of weapons visible, the number of crew members she could see. 7 so far, probably more throughout the ship, all armed with military-grade weapons, all moving with professional coordination. This wasn't a smuggling operation. This was a military operation disguised as smuggling. The interrogation room was actually a storage compartment that had been converted for the purpose. A single chair bolted to the floor, chains attached to the bulkheads, stains on the floor that Helena recognized as old blood. They'd done this before. Multiple times, probably. This was a ship designed for abduction and interrogation, not just smuggling. They secured her to the chair with additional restraints, her ankles zip-tied to the legs, her torso bound with rope. Helena didn't resist. She was saving her energy, conserving her strength for whatever came next. The two men left without speaking, locking the heavy steel door behind them. Alone in the dim room, Helena assessed her situation with the cold analytical clarity that had kept her alive through 15 years of dangerous work. Captured, compromised, no communication with her team, no way to signal distress, armed guards throughout the ship, torture imminent, execution likely after they extracted whatever information they wanted. The situation was, objectively, very bad, but she wasn't dead yet. And as long as she wasn't dead, there was a chance. The SEALs were out there, Morrison and his team. They'd realized something was wrong when she didn't check in. They'd come for her. She just had to stay alive long enough for them to arrive, and she had to hope that when they came, it wouldn't be too late. 800 meters from the cargo ship, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison floated in the dark Pacific, watching the seconds tick by on his waterproof watch and trying to ignore the growing sense of unease in his gut. Helena had been aboard the ship for 37 minutes. Her scheduled check-in had been due 7 minutes ago. Not a critical delay. Inspections sometimes ran long, but enough to make him concerned. Overwatch Sierra 1, he transmitted on the encrypted channel that connected him to the operations center back at Coronado. Any word from our package? The communications specialist back at base responded immediately. Negative, Sierra 1. Last transmission was 39 minutes ago. Standard surveillance photos of the cargo hold. Nothing since then. Her tracker shows she's stationary. Same location for the last 22 minutes. Her beacon status? Still transmitting. Strong signal. But no movement, no communications, no check-in. Morrison exchanged looks with Chief Hayes through their night vision systems, the only way to see each other in the pitch-black ocean. They couldn't actually make out facial expressions at this distance in these conditions, but SEALs developed an almost supernatural awareness of their teammates' states of mind. Hayes's concern was palpable, even through the darkness and distance. Could be nothing, Hayes said over their point-to-point secure communications. Could be a long inspection. Could be she's in a location where she can't transmit safely. Could be, Morrison agreed. But his instincts, honed over 15 years and more missions than he could count, were screaming that something was wrong. In his experience, when an operation felt wrong, it usually was wrong. How long do we give her before we move in? Protocol says another 23 minutes until we're authorized to assume compromise and initiate emergency extraction, Hayes replied. But protocol also says trust your gut, and my gut says this feels wrong. Morrison was about to make a decision when their communication system crackled with a new signal. Not Helena's voice, not Overwatch. This was the emergency beacon, the signal that meant the mission was compromised and immediate extraction was required. But it wasn't transmitting the standard emergency code. Instead, it was sending a rapid series of clicks and tones that took Morrison's trained ear only a second to recognize as Morse code, transmitted at high speed by someone who knew they had only seconds to communicate. COMPROMISED, SHIP, ARMED, MULTIPLE, HOSTILES, TRAP. Then, the transmission cut off, abruptly, mid-word. That's not Helena's signal, Hayes said immediately. That's someone else using her equipment, sending us a warning. Which means they found her beacon, Morrison replied, his mind already racing through tactical options and none of them good. Which means she's blown. Which means we have about 60 seconds before they either kill her or throw that beacon overboard to throw us off the trail. Either way, we're about to lose our only connection to her. He keyed the team-wide channel, his voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. All Sierra elements, this is Sierra 1. Package is compromised. Hostile forces are aware of surveillance. Stand by for violent boarding action. Rules of engagement are weapons-free. Anyone on that ship with a weapon is a legitimate target. Our mission priority is extraction of Agent Scott alive. Everything else is secondary. Acknowledge. The acknowledgments came back instantly. 8 voices responding with the calm professionalism that came from years of training and operations. This was what SEALs lived for. The impossible rescues, the situations where failure meant someone died and success meant bringing them home against all odds. Morrison checked his waterproof tactical display, calculating distances and speeds. The ship was 800 meters away and moving at approximately 12 knots. They could close that distance in maybe 15 minutes of hard swimming, but that assumed the ship maintained its current course and speed. If the crew realized SEALs were approaching, they could accelerate, making interception impossible. Sierra 2 and 3, you're with me on starboard approach. Sierra 4 and 5, take port. Sierra 6 through 8, stern approach. We execute simultaneous breach on my mark. Weapons hot, safeties off, shoot to kill on anyone armed. Let's bring her home. The team began moving through the water like predatory shadows, their rebreathers making them invisible to both visual and sonar detection, their movements coordinated with the precision that came from thousands of hours of training together. Morrison's mind was already 3 steps ahead, planning the assault, identifying weak points in the ship's defenses, calculating angles and timing and the 100 other variables that determined whether a mission succeeded or became a disaster. They'd covered half the distance when the ship's engines suddenly changed pitch, the distinctive thrum of diesel engines accelerating to higher RPMs. Morrison's heart sank as he realized what was happening. The crew was running, trying to put distance between the ship and the boarding area before the SEALs could reach them. At 18 knots, the vessel could outrun swimming SEALs indefinitely. Sierra 1, Overwatch. Target vessel is accelerating. New speed approximately 18 knots, bearing 090. At current speeds, you will not be able to intercept. Understood, Overwatch, Morrison replied, though internally he was running through every contingency they'd planned and trying to find one that fit this scenario. Swimming at maximum sustained speed, SEALs could manage about 3 knots. Against an 18-knot ship, they had no chance of catching up through direct pursuit, which meant they needed to think differently. All elements, new strategy. We're not chasing, we're intercepting. Overwatch, I need projected course and speed maintained. Give me an intercept point assuming we hold current position and they maintain current heading. There was a brief pause while the analysts worked the problem, running calculations on heading, speed, ocean currents, and wind. Sierra 1. If target maintains current course and speed, they will pass within approximately 600 meters of your position in 18 minutes. However, that assumes they don't alter course. Copy that. All elements, we hold position and wait. When they pass, we use whatever current assist we can get and execute a sprint swim to intercept. Board on the move. It's going to be rough, but it's our only shot at getting to Agent Scott before they kill her. The waiting was the hardest part. Floating in the dark, cold Pacific water, 58 degrees that seeped through even the best dry suits and slowly drained body heat, knowing that Helena was somewhere on that ship, probably being interrogated, possibly being tortured, definitely in mortal danger. And they couldn't do anything about it yet. They had to wait for geometry and timing to align, had to trust that opportunity would present itself. Morrison used the time to refine their assault plan, running through scenarios in his head, identifying likely crew positions based on what they knew of the ship's layout. The stern would be their best approach point, fewer crew likely to be stationed there, and the engine noise would cover sounds of boarding. They'd use magnetic climbing clamps to scale the hull, ascend in coordinated pairs to provide mutual cover, then split into 3 teams to sweep the ship systematically. Remember, he told his team over their secure channel, Priority 1 is locating and securing Agent Scott. Priority 2 is identifying the cargo. If we have to choose, we choose Scott. The cargo can be interdicted by other means. She can't. Clear. 8 acknowledgments came back immediately. The ship appeared through their night vision like a massive shadow moving across their field of view, its bulk blotting out the stars, its wake churning the water into phosphorescent trails. Morrison timed their sprint carefully, factoring in the wake turbulence, the ship's speed, the angle of approach. Too early, and they'd exhaust themselves before reaching the hull. Too late, and they'd miss their window entirely. On my mark, he transmitted. 3, 2, 1, mark. 8 SEALs surged forward, swimming with every ounce of strength and technique they possessed, fighting against the ship's wake that tried to push them away, using the turbulence of the propellers to mask their approach from any sonar that might be operating. Morrison reached the hull first, feeling the vibration of the engines through the steel, slapping a magnetic clamp onto the riveted surface and securing his climbing line. Beside him, Hayes did the same, and then Martinez and the others. They climbed in synchronized pairs, weapons slung across their backs, moving with practiced efficiency that made scaling a moving ship look almost easy. Almost. The reality was that every handhold had to be perfect, every movement calculated, because one slip would send them into the propeller wash and probable death. Morrison reached the rail first, paused for a fraction of a second to scan with his night vision. 2 crew members visible on the stern deck, both smoking cigarettes, both with AK-47 rifles slung casually over their shoulders. Not expecting trouble, not expecting 8 heavily armed Navy SEALs to materialize from the ocean darkness. He signaled to Hayes with hand signs that had been second nature to both of them for years. 2 targets, both armed, simultaneous engagement, suppressed weapons, on 3. They rose together like wraiths, their suppressed HK-416 rifles finding targets with the kind of precision that came from thousands of hours on the range and dozens of real-world engagements. 2 soft coughs, barely audible over the engine noise and ocean sounds. 2 bodies dropping, the cigarettes falling from dead hands, the rifles clattering quietly to the deck. Morrison and Hayes were over the rail and securing the stern before the bodies had finished falling, their weapons up and scanning for additional threats, their training making every movement smooth and deliberate. The rest of the team followed within seconds, flowing over the rail like shadows, spreading out in practiced patterns that covered every angle, every potential threat vector. Within 90 seconds of reaching the rail, the stern deck was secure. 4 dead enemy crew members. They'd encountered 2 more while clearing adjacent positions, and the SEALs were stacked up at the door, leading into the superstructure, ready to move into the ship's interior. "Sierra 1, we're aboard," Morrison transmitted to Overwatch. "Beginning internal sweep. Last known position of package was cargo hold, lower deck. Moving to intercept. Be advised, crew is armed and appears to have military training. This is not a typical smuggling operation." They moved through the ship like ghosts made real, using night vision to navigate the corridors, weapons up and ready, clearing each space with the methodical precision that separated professional operators from amateurs. They encountered resistance. 3 more crew members in the corridor outside the engine room, all armed, all reacting with the kind of speed that confirmed Morrison's assessment that these were trained fighters, not ordinary sailors. The engagement was brief and brutal. Suppressed gunfire, bodies dropping, the SEALs moving through the aftermath without breaking stride. Morrison noted that the enemy crew were all carrying military-grade weapons and wearing tactical gear under their civilian clothes. This was definitely a military operation, not just smuggling. They reached the cargo hold and swept it systematically, clearing corners and checking behind containers with practiced efficiency. But Helena wasn't there, neither was most of the crew. The hold was largely empty except for the shipping containers, which were sealed and would require time to open properly. "Sierra 2, hold this position and start documenting those containers," Morrison ordered one of his team members. "Get serial numbers, photos, anything that might help identify the cargo. Everyone else, we keep searching. She's somewhere on this ship." They swept through the vessel deck by deck, room by room. Crew quarters, empty. Bridge, abandoned on autopilot. Engine room, unmanned except for automated systems. Galley, deserted. It was as if most of the crew had simply vanished. "Boss, something's wrong here," Hayes said, his voice tight with concern as they cleared yet another empty compartment. "This is too empty. A ship this size should have at least 20 crew members. We've only encountered 7, and they're all dead. Where's everyone else?" Morrison's stomach sank as realization hit him. They knew we were coming. Not just that Scott was an agent, they knew SEALs would attempt a rescue. So they took her and evacuated most of the crew. Probably had a support vessel nearby. Transferred everyone over while we were swimming to intercept. This whole ship is a decoy, set on autopilot to keep us busy while they escape with her. "Her beacon?" Martinez asked. Morrison checked his tracking display, dreading what he'd see. The beacon showed Helena's position as stationary, exactly where they'd picked up the Morse code signal. But she wasn't here, which meant they threw the beacon overboard, he said, the words bitter in his mouth. That's why the signal is stationary. It's sitting on the ocean floor, right where we first detected the emergency transmission, and Helena is on another ship, Hayes finished, getting further away every second we waste here. Morrison fought down the rage and frustration that threatened to overwhelm his tactical thinking. Emotion was the enemy in situations like this. They needed to think, to analyze, to find a way forward despite the setback. "Overwatch Sierra 1, we have a situation. Primary vessel is largely deserted. Crew appears to have transferred to a support vessel. Do you have any radar contacts departing this area in the last hour? Stand by, Sierra 1. The pause felt eternal. Morrison could feel his team's tension. They'd risked everything to board this ship, had killed enemy combatants, had exposed themselves to potential counterattack, and it had all been for nothing. Their target wasn't here. Sierra 1 Overwatch, we show one significant radar contact departing the area approximately 38 minutes ago. Small vessel, high speed, bearing 045 degrees. Last known position approximately 15 miles northeast of your current location. Moving at approximately 35 knots. 15 miles, with a 40-minute head start. The mathematics were brutal. Even if they could somehow follow, they'd never catch a vessel moving at that speed. And they had no idea where it was ultimately heading. We need extraction, Hayes said quietly. Get back to base, coordinate with larger assets, maybe get satellite tracking. We can't do this alone anymore, Jake. Morrison knew his second-in-command was right, but the thought of leaving Helena out there in the hands of hostile forces who'd already demonstrated they had no qualms about killing her made him physically sick. She trusted them, trusted him, and now she was gone, probably being interrogated or tortured or worse, and they'd failed to reach her in time. Overwatch, Sierra 1. We require immediate extraction, fast boat if possible, and I need every surveillance asset we have tracking that contact. Satellite, drone, signals intelligence, anything. We are not losing her. Confirm. Roger, Sierra 1. Fast boat is inbound from patrol. ETA 42 minutes. And sir, the communications specialist's voice hesitated. About 3 minutes ago, we detected what our analysts believe was a large displacement event, consistent with a human body being thrown into the water, at the approximate coordinates where we lost Agent Scott's beacon signal. Morrison's blood ran cold. No, they wouldn't have killed her that quickly. They'd want to interrogate her first, find out what she knew, what naval intelligence knew about their operation, unless they'd already gotten what they wanted, unless they'd decided she was more liability than asset, unless they'd simply concluded that the easiest solution was to make her disappear into the Pacific Ocean where no rescue was possible. Those coordinates, how far from our current position? Approximately 9.8 miles, bearing 270 degrees. Morrison looked at Hayes, saw his own desperate hope reflected in the chief's eyes, despite the night vision gear distorting their features. 9.8 miles, in the dark, in 58-degree water. If Helena was alive, and that was a massive, probably unrealistic if, she'd have maybe 2 hours before hypothermia killed her. Probably significantly less given that she'd be without protective gear, probably without the ability to move effectively to generate heat. We swim, Morrison said, making the decision even as part of his brain screamed that it was irrational, that the odds were impossible, that she was probably already dead. All elements, we swim, now. Maximum sustainable speed. We have maybe 90 minutes before hypothermia becomes irreversible even if we find her. Boss, that's 9 miles in this water with full gear, one of the other SEALs said, his voice carrying clear doubt. We'll be hypothermic ourselves before we get halfway there. And that's assuming she's even alive, assuming they actually threw her overboard at those coordinates, assuming a dozen other things that might not be true. Then we'd better swim fast, Morrison replied, his voice carrying the kind of absolute authority that cut off further debate. Because she's one of ours. Because we don't leave our people behind. Because if there's even a 1% chance she's alive out there, we go get her. That's what we do. That's who we are. Now gear up and move out. They went over the side, back into the cold Pacific darkness, and began swimming toward coordinates where someone might or might not be alive, might or might not be Helena, might or might not be anything more than a false hope. The mathematics said it was futile. The odds said they'd never arrive in time. Logic and training both said they should wait for proper search and rescue assets with thermal imaging and coordination capabilities. But SEALs didn't operate solely on mathematics or odds or logic. They operated on loyalty, on determination, on the absolute conviction that impossible was just a word used by people who quit too easily. They operated on the principle that you never abandoned your teammates, never gave up when someone's life was on the line, never accepted defeat while there was still a chance. Helena Scott was out there somewhere, and they were going to find her, or die trying. The cold had stopped bothering Helena about 20 minutes ago. That was bad. She knew from her survival training that when you stopped feeling cold, it meant your body was losing the ability to regulate temperature, meant hypothermia was advancing from the initial stages into something more dangerous. Her core temperature was probably around 94 or 95 degrees now, low enough that her brain was starting to malfunction, her thoughts becoming sluggish and disconnected. She'd been in the water for what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 60 or 70 minutes, long enough that her body had gone through the initial shock, the violent shivering, the desperate attempt to generate heat through muscle contractions. Now she was in the next phase, the dangerous phase where the shivering stopped, where her body began shutting down non-essential functions to preserve the core, where death became a real and imminent possibility. The zip ties were gone. She'd managed to work them off in the first 10 minutes, using a technique she'd learned in a CIA training course years ago, dislocating her thumb to slip one hand through, then using her teeth in her free hand to cut through the plastic with the edge of her watch. It had been agonizing, and she'd probably done permanent damage to her thumb joint, but it had freed her hands and given her a chance. She'd immediately stripped off everything she could, shoes first, feeling them sink into the darkness below, then her suit jacket, her pants, anything that added weight and drag. Now she was in just her undergarments and blouse, significantly more buoyant, but also more exposed to the cold that was slowly killing her. The technique for staying afloat was called drown-proofing, a survival method where you floated vertically, letting your body hang limp, only moving when you needed to breathe. It conserved energy, minimized heat loss, and could extend survival time in cold water by hours. Helena had practiced it in training, in pools and controlled environments, but practicing in a warm pool with instructors standing by was very different from doing it for real in the open Pacific, 60 miles from land, with no guarantee that anyone was coming. She'd lost track of time, couldn't tell if she'd been in the water for an hour or 3 hours. Her watch had stopped working after she'd used it to cut the zip ties, and her sense of time had become unreliable as hypothermia affected her brain. The stars above provided no help. They just wheeled slowly across the sky, indifferent to her situation, marking time in a way that felt both too fast and too slow. Helena talked to herself when she had the energy, her voice barely a whisper over the sound of waves. Stay awake. Don't sleep. Sleeping is dying. Keep moving. Keep breathing. Someone's coming. Morrison and his team. They're looking for you. They don't leave people behind. Just stay alive a little longer. But part of her brain, the rational part that was still functioning despite the hypothermia, knew that the odds of rescue were minimal. The ocean was vast. She was small. Even if the SEALs realized she'd been thrown overboard, even if they knew approximately where, finding one person in miles of open water at night was nearly impossible. She thought about her family. Her sister Sarah, who told her the intelligence work was too dangerous, that she should quit before it killed her. Turned out Sarah had been right. Her father, who taught her to never give up, to fight through impossible situations with stubbornness and determination. She was trying, Dad. She was really trying. A wave broke over her face, and she swallowed water, coughed, struggled to get her head above the surface. Her kicks were getting weaker, her body's ability to keep her afloat diminishing as muscles grew cold and unresponsive. This was it. This was how it ended. Not in a firefight, not in a dramatic rescue gone wrong, but alone in the dark water, slowly freezing to death while the rest of the world continued on, unaware and uncaring. "No," she said aloud, though her voice was so weak she could barely hear it herself. "No. You don't get to quit. Not like this." She forced herself to kick harder, to move her arms, to generate heat through movement, even though every muscle screamed in protest. The movement helped a little, bought her a few more minutes, but she knew it was temporary. She was running out of time, running out of strength, running out of hope. That's when she heard it. A sound that at first she thought was another hallucination, her brain making up the rescue that wasn't coming. But it came again, clearer this time. Splashing, rhythmic, like multiple people swimming with purpose and coordination. "Here," Helena tried to shout, but her voice came out as barely a whisper, her throat raw from seawater and cold. "I'm here. Help!" The splashing stopped. The silence was crushing. She'd imagined it, hallucinated it. There was no one there. Then a light blazed in her face, blinding her after so long in darkness, and a voice she recognized called out, "Got her! Sierra 1, this is Sierra 4. We have the package. She's alive. Repeat, package located and alive." Hands grabbed her, strong and sure, keeping her head above water. "Ma'am, I'm Petty Officer Martinez, Navy SEAL. We've got you now. You're going to be okay. Just stay with us." "Cold," Helena managed, through teeth that were chattering so violently she thought they might break. "I know, ma'am. We're going to fix that. But first we need to get these restraints." "Wait, you already got them off? Damn, that's impressive." "Okay, we're going to get you into a dry suit, get you warmed up. Hold still for us." More SEALs appeared around her. Helena tried to count them, but her brain wouldn't cooperate. 4, 5, didn't matter. They were here. They'd found her. "Ma'am, we need to move you around a bit to get this dry suit on," Martinez continued, his voice calm and professional. "Your arms and legs aren't going to cooperate much. Just stay limp and let us handle it. Can you do that?" Helena tried to nod, but wasn't sure if her head actually moved. Everything felt distant and disconnected, like she was watching events happen to someone else. She felt them manipulating her body, felt fabric sliding over cold skin, felt the instant difference as the dry suit began trapping what little body heat she had left. Someone activated a chemical heat pack and pressed it against her chest inside the suit. The warmth was incredible, almost painful after so long in the cold. Helena wanted to cry from relief but didn't have the energy. "Good, that's good," Martinez was saying. "Boss, she's secured. Core temp is probably 92, maybe 93. She's hypothermic but responsive. We need extraction ASAP." Another voice, deeper, with command authority. "Copy that, Sierra 4. Outstanding work. Keep her warm and alert. We're 5 minutes out. Extraction bird is 8 minutes behind us. She's going to make it." Helena wanted to thank them, wanted to tell them how grateful she was, how she'd thought she was going to die, how they'd saved her life. But her mouth wouldn't form the words. She settled for just breathing, just staying conscious, just holding on a few minutes longer. Because she'd done it. She'd survived. Against impossible odds, with her hands tied in 60-degree water, she'd lasted long enough for the SEALs